One of the reasons that people often employ a dual morality when it comes to dealing with ethical challenges in the workplace is because they have questions about what exactly the connection is between ethical behavior and success and profitability in the workplace. So we need to think about that, I think, a little bit more deeply in order to understand exactly what is the connection between good ethics and good business. For example, years ago, Harvard Business Review published a very provocative piece, which I think got the basic idea right. The piece was entitled, "Why Be Honest If Honesty Doesn't Pay?" Now, what I mean, what they got right is the idea that we want people in the workplace to do the right thing, not because it pays off, but because it's right. And I think they were correct about that. But the premise of the piece, that honesty doesn't pay, I think is the controversial part that's worth looking at in a little bit more detail. So let's distinguish between the short term and the long term on each of these things. In the short term, I think it's fair to say that there's almost always a cost involved to ethical behavior. Think about it like this. If good ethics was always good business and always led to profitability, we wouldn't actually be having this discussion. In fact, we would recognize that everybody would do the right thing unless they were just an idiot or short-sighted, because it would contribute to their profitability. But we know that that's not true precisely because we have ethical tensions and temptations in the workplace. And most of the time, in the short term, I think it's fair to say that ethical behavior carries some sort of cost to a person's or an individual's self-interest. Now, there may be exceptions to that, but in the long run, I think you can make a much better argument for ethical behavior contributing to success and profitability in the workplace. Here's the reason. Most businesses that I'm aware of are dependent on repeat customers. And the ones that are especially are dependent upon a certain set of virtues being exemplified in the workplace. Chief among them is the virtue of trust. I mean, think about it like this. Think about how difficult it is to do business in the parts of the world where the trust level is low, where corruption is high and trust is low. It's not an accident that countries that are the highest on the corruption scale are also generally lowest on the economic development scale. But think a little closer to home. Think about how easy it would be. How inclined are you to do business with people who you trust? I suspect that most of us would say, yeah, I would go out of my way and maybe even pay higher prices to do business with people who I trust. But if we turn that question around and phrased it a little bit differently, I think it would be even clearer. How many of you would go out of your way to avoid doing business with people who you don't trust? And I think if you have the opportunity to do that, almost all of us would appreciate the opportunity to do business with people who we don't trust. See, I think this is one of the misconceptions about both business and our economic system. It's widely held that business is premised on greed. But in fact, in my view, I think you can make a good argument that it's trust, not greed, that's the engine that drives our economic system. I had a vivid lesson of this, one of my graduate students a few years ago. He had come to study with us at Talbot School of Theology from Ethiopia. He had never really been outside of his village before and had never really had a place to study that was conducive for him. And so within the first couple of days he had come to the U.S., I took him out for lunch. And when it came time to pay the bill, I handed the server my credit card, and my friend looked at me and said, "What's that?" referring to the credit card. And so it was really interesting. I would have given anything to have been a sort of fly on the inside of his mind to figure out what he was thinking about as the credit transaction took place. In fact, what I think he was concluding was that somehow, as I signed the bill and we got up to leave without any cash exchanging hands, I suspect what he thought was that my ethics professor is somehow stealing our lunch, because he didn't understand that American Express trusted me to pay the bill within 30 days, and the restaurant trusted American Express to pay them within 30 days. And if that trust level wasn't there, no credit transactions would ever take place. And so I explained to him what a credit transaction was about and how trust was the premise on which that transaction was taking place. He said, oh, that kind of thing would never happen where I come from. In fact, as he described it, he said, in some transactions, people actually hold on to the money with one hand and the product that they're selling with another, and both release it at exactly the same time because the trust level is so low. So this is why I would suggest that it's incorrect to equate profit with greed. Profit's simply a market signal that tells a company how efficiently they're using your resources. And I think in a Christian worldview, what we could probably say is that an honest profit might actually be an indication of how effectively a company is fulfilling the dominion mandate that God originally gave them in Genesis 1 and 2. When it comes to difficult ethical situations where there's ambiguity about what the right thing to do is, obviously in those cases where it's clear that you are being asked to violate a command of God or a biblical principle, you have to, with grace and with sensitivity, explain that you simply can't do that and would appreciate another option. But in places where there's ambiguity, sometimes the temptation is just to run at the first hint of an ethical challenge. We would encourage you to keep your place at the table and to consider how you might be able to influence the decisions that are made in the future. Because if you run at the first whiff of ethical challenge, the chances are that the person who will take your place will not have nearly as sensitive a conscience as you do. And though you may feel really good about walking out for about 15 minutes, your organization is not being well served if you run at the first hint of ethical challenge.